Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 11 of Scranton Isolation Informances. And this time, as you may have heard, when I put up the hold placeholder before the video, Joseph would like to know if everybody likes his shirt. And so he clearly must like his shirt. It looks like Curious George. Is it Curious George? Fabulous. We are excited to have Joseph Boga and Kako Miura here with us today to talk about historical performance from both a classical and jazz perspective. I'd like you to welcome my co-host for this week, Paula Bailey. Paula is a University of Scranton graduate. She got her master's there in English in 2009, and she is a writer and a tutor and a community activist and volunteer, and had a long and much acclaimed career teaching. And she has an amazing dog and grandchildren, and she's just, she's sometimes, some people are afraid of her as the language police because she is the best writer anybody knows. Paula, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're your interest in music. Obviously, I don't have anybody here who's not interested in music. So tell everybody anything I missed about you, and tell us about you musically as well.
Okay. I've been a fan of performance music now for many years. It wasn't until I retired from teaching that I actually got a chance to sing with the choir. And for those of you who don't perform, there's nothing like the thrill of creating music. From the chaos of the initial learning the music to the beauty of finally putting together a piece for performance mode, it's a little piece of the divine. I'm thrilled to be a part of this Informance this evening with Kako and with Joseph and with Cheryl, and I thank you for including me.
Cool. So let's get to the main event. We've got a trumpet player who plays classical and jazz, but primarily he is known as a classical player, and a violinist plays all kinds of classical violin, but is currently focusing on historical performance. And I'll start ladies first. So first I'll introduce Kako. Kako holds a bachelor's degree in violin performance from the Juilliard School. And then she went out to Coburn School, which is like the Curtis of the West Coast, right? Sort of, right? Am I right? Or Curtis is the Coburn of the East Coast?
There you go. Right.
So, but it's big. And she went out there and she got her master's in violin performance out there. And now she's back at the Juilliard School, where she is in the very selective historical performance program in violin performance. Is your major actually Baroque violin, or is it just historical performance violin?
The major is historical performance.
So she's doing a postmaster's degree, artist diploma or artist certificate or something like that, they call it, in historical performance. And every time she plays, my heart just sings, like it soars. My favorite violinist, Kako, tell us a little more about yourself and your experiences. And what led you to the historical performance program?
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for having us. So as you said, I'm currently studying historical performance at Juilliard. My first exposure, I guess, to the world of historical performance was actually at Juilliard, because the historical performance department offers secondary lessons to students in the regular music division on Baroque instruments. So I actually took secondary Baroque violin lessons when I was an undergrad. And they have also a class called Baroque as a Second Language, BSL for short.
That's bizarre.
And so I took that class, and I got started playing on Baroque violin and bow. So that was kind of my first exposure. And yeah, I think in classical music training, I mean, we all kind of, it's understood that you don't play, let's say, Bach the same way you would play Shostakovich, for example. And the idea of historical performance, I suppose, is kind of taking that even further and trying to really get acquainted with the sound that the people of the composer's time would have expected and heard. So, but anyway, so I had played a little bit of Baroque violin when I was an undergrad, and then when I went to Colburn, I joined the Baroque ensemble at Colburn, just kind of on a whim, I suppose, because my advisor was like, "Oh yeah, there's a Baroque ensemble, and they're always looking for people to play." And so, and for when I first joined, I was the only upper string player. I was the only violinist with like 3 oboes and and 1 cello and 2 harpsichords. So it was like kind of a ragtag group. And then, as we performed more and got the word out and everything, by the time I left, we were putting on concerts with a whole string section. So I got a lot of experience playing Baroque music at Colburn, especially because the director of the Baroque ensemble was really kind and gave me a lot of guidance and helped me prepare for my audition at Juilliard, and kind of taught me a lot more about historical performance in the world and the styles and everything. So yeah, and as I started to listen to it more and play it, I began to really become interested in it. So so here I am.
Cool. And you've done a whole bunch of like summer programs, including Aspen, which has, by the way, I don't know if you notice, a gorgeous picture of you with your hair flying, smiling, wearing red and playing like in their publicity materials, which is kind of cool. Next to you is our mutual friend there, Mr. Joe Boga. And I'm not really sure how to introduce him. So I, of course, listened to Joseph from when he was 10 years old and refusing to read music and everything.
Trumpet as well.
Yes, everything in between. And then he fell in love with Louis Armstrong. It was a Louis Armstrong CD that changed everything. And throughout his middle school and high school years, I remember this middle school principal who asked him to play a jazz version of the Star Spangled Banner for class night. It's probably the first time in a middle school that the cheering took down the house for somebody playing an instrument and not for, I don't know, whatever. It was a very cool thing. And throughout, middle school and high school, he had some amazing opportunities, both jazz and classical. And actually, one of the people that helped provide some of those amazing opportunities, Lauren Schoenberg, is watching with us tonight. So when I said he plays both jazz and classical music, he immediately jumped in and said, "Hey, he's a jazz guy."
Right, yeah.
But Joseph played a lot of orchestral stuff, so he has more than a passing familiarity with classical practice, but he is a jazz guy. Lauren's absolutely right. And Joseph's 2014 graduate of the Juilliard School and has been freelancing successfully in New York and everywhere. Both coasts, a number of countries, film, stage, and screen. So why don't you do a little better than what I just did and introduce yourself, Joseph, and talk about how you became interested in historical performance in jazz?
Sure, yeah. So I'm obviously Cheryl's son, and I started playing in her band when I was probably 12 years old or something, just like pretending to play. And I kind of grew up in the band room at the University of Scranton, just playing different instruments when my mom was working and everything. So I was always exposed to music from a very young age and playing with ensembles. All of her students were like very kind mentors to me growing up as people and musicians. And so then I got serious about playing because of my fifth grade band teacher, Mr. Williams. He took me out of class and basically told me, you don't have to go to class if you practice from this book I'm going to give you, which was an Arbenz book. And I guess he saw some talent / knew my mom. And I didn't want to go to class. So I was like, great, I'll practice from the Arbenz book every day during the class period. And that got me excited about playing the trumpet and getting interested in jazz. It was my mom bought me Ken Burns Jazz, the Louis Armstrong CD compilation. And like my parents gave it to me in like a stocking stuffer. And so I took it out and I was like, oh, what is this? I don't know what it is. Whatever. I listened to Weird Al. That was my music to listen to.
And the Beach Boys. Weird Al.
Right, the Beach Boys, I like
with the Beach Boys.
Right. And the Beatles. And so I just let it sit on my desk for, I don't even know how long. I started feeling guilty because it was still in its wrapper. And my parents got me this nice gift. I'm a terrible son for not listening to it or appreciating it. So I decided, well, I'll open it and then it should be fine. But then I felt guilty because I felt like he was lying, because it's like, oh, well, I'm pretending like I listened to it and I didn't listen to it. So then I decided, okay, I'm going to listen to it once. I'll just put it on and I'll listen to it once. And I remember the first song that was on there was Potato Head Blues. And every night before going to bed, I would listen to that recording on my little boombox I had. And that kind of spurred my whole love of jazz. And as my mom was saying, I had tons of wonderful opportunities to play jazz and music through high school and middle school. I studied with Wynton Marsalis. I got to study with Mark Gould before I ended up at Juilliard. And yeah, I mean, she would take me into the city. I got to play some gigs with Lauren Schoenberg. He was so kind to have I don't know, an eighth grader come and play, do the best he could do on some gigs, which was, wonderful experience. And, I think I kind of, as I progress and as I listen to more music, because I listen to music all the time, I started getting away from like that Louis Armstrong earlier jazz stuff. And I probably didn't really come back to it until I got a bit older, even though it was the thing that kind of sparked my interest. The thing that kind of got me even thinking of the idea of historical performance in terms of a jazz perspective was playing with Vince Giordano, which I'll talk a little bit about later, how I ended up doing that. But I would probably equate him to jazz what Elliot Gardner would be kind of to classical music, playing the music as it was performed at the time with the spirit of the time, Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
So what kind of things do you play? What, you play all over the place. You play clubs.
Sure, yeah.
Like some of your favorite places or groups to play with?
Sure. So, I play a lot with Vince Giordano as a sub. I sub for both the trumpet players, mainly for John Eric Kelso. And that has been like a truly transforming experience as a musician and a thinker and a listener. He's fantastic. If you don't know who he is, he leads a band that's kind of comprised, and they play all the music from like the 1920s and 30s. That's their specialty. He's like the best in the world for it. He's the man. So I'm very fortunate to get to play with them a lot. And I don't know. That's mainly what I do now, is more on the traditional jazz, as they would call it, jazz scene. I could go on and on about all the wonderful experiences I've had.
Okay, good.
Yeah, people have given me opportunities and stuff like that. Okay. Very fortunate.
Just stop. Okay, so we're going to turn this over to Joseph and Kako. And, this is going to be fascinating for me because I am one of those awful people. Kako, get ready because you're going to hate me now when I confess this. But I'm one of those people that, I remember somebody saying, well, we were doing Bach Mass in B minor, I think, with my choir, and a friend coming to meet me after rehearsal saying, well, that's not how that ornamentation goes. And my answer was, that's how I like the ornamentation. Shut up. Bach is dead. The guys who wrote this stuff never met him. And I'm going to do it the way that sounds good for me and my choir. And so I am that awful person. I have a disregard for that stuff. And I also, some of it is just because, normal musical training, you don't find out about that stuff. You don't really know a lot about that stuff. So you tend to, So take it away, you guys.
Yeah, so I think that I don't disagree with your perspective. I mean, I think this is the same for Joseph, but the reason why I enjoy historical performance and like learning about it and playing in the different styles is because I like the way that it sounds. And that's the reason why I got into it to begin with was, I heard these sounds that I hadn't heard before, and I was like, this is awesome. This sounds really good. And so I think ultimately, um, you know, historical performance, everything included, music is performing music is about bringing the concept of the piece to life in the way that you by bringing out the things that you find interesting about it. And I think the philosophy behind, I think there tends to be a misconception that historical performance, in the historical performance world, people are like, oh, this is, incorrect, and this isn't actually what he wrote. And, being very nitpicky about ornaments and the different, whatever it is, the manuscripts and all that stuff. And, we do study those things, but I think the ultimate goal of that is to, widen our perspective and understanding. And and I mean, for me, I happen to like the way that it sounds. So it works out. So I think that's kind of my approach to historical performance. Now, it is kind of a very vague concept, right? We don't really know. People, I think a lot of people would be hard pressed to come up with a definition of what historical performance is. I think a lot of specialists in it too, and I mean, it might be different for everybody. There are some people who specialize in specifically Baroque music or specifically Renaissance music. I think they're generally historical performance as a concept is associated with Baroque music, but there's actually people who study the performance practices of all kinds of different periods up to, Romantic. And I would say even, you could really look at the way that people played in the 20th century, and it's already very different from, especially the earliest 20th century, it's very different from the way that people play now today. So I kind of think of it as just the general approach to music making, where you try to learn about the historical context and patterns and stylistic idiosyncrasies and what was expected generally of composers and performers during that time. But the Juilliard program actually focuses mostly in Baroque music. So that's kind of what I'm doing a lot of work on now. But I'm definitely interested in, learning about the performance practices of all periods. And when it comes to how we figure out these things, how do we even know what Bach would have expected, or Mozart or Brahms or whomever?
Because as my mom put them, they're dead, they're not around.
Yeah.
You don't know who they are. So
Yeah.
how do you know? Right.
Splash. Bach is dead. How do you know what he wanted? And there weren't videos then.
Right. So how do you know, Kako? Right.
So, unlike in jazz, we can't actually go back and listen to what people in those times sounded like when they performed. So there are a lot of different ways. I mean, I think the most common way that people glean information is from writings, contemporary writings, mainly treatises. There were a lot of musicians who wrote, entire volumes on how to perform certain styles of music, whether it be for their students or for anybody trying to learn music, including Leopold Mozart, the Mozart's father. So yeah, a lot of the bulk of historical performance research is reading treatises. But there are things that we need to consider when reading these documents too, because as I'll reference later as well, it's actually a lot of things weren't codified. And so depending on the region and the specific time period, things were always changing, and people had personal tastes, obviously. So we need to kind of look at each piece of evidence individually. And I mean, as I said, ultimately come to our own decisions. So, but yeah, and another way that we know that we can look into more of the historical side of things is by looking at the actual manuscripts. We're lucky enough to have a lot of the manuscripts that were made by the composers themselves. But even then, there are errors. I mean, composers are humans too. Although
more than others.
And it's interesting because I think in the romantic ideal of the composer as genius kind of conflicts with the idea that composers are humans. But so there are errors, and you have to decide whether that's something that you want to mitigate or not. And then another thing that I've found interesting from reading books and things like that is, there are actually often pretty well kept records of certain things, like where composers had worked and who played under whom they played with, because musicians were mostly employed by courts or churches, and those places paid people. So there are records for the employment records and things like that. So you can actually trace to a large extent what kind of contacts composers had and their influences and so on. And then another thing that we look at is the instruments, which tells us a lot because, for example, now pitch is standardized at generally at 440 hertz. That's what everybody expects of modern pitch. But pitch wasn't standardized until, I believe, even into the 19th century. And officially, I think in the 20th century.
Right. Yeah. Because even trumpet players have to deal with that, like early trumpets being in high pitch versus low pitch.
Yeah, and actually, the concept of transposing instruments like trumpets and clarinets and so on is a hangover from different pitches being used, and so musicians had to transpose all the time. But from looking at instruments that are extant from the period where pitches can't be easily altered, so like organs and old flutes and recorders, we can kind of glean what kind of pitches they were working with. And
doesn't that, I always wondered this, doesn't that drive you nuts? Because when I listen to like original instrument ensembles with winds, Like, I don't even know, like, if I were going to play with them, what would I tune to? It's a practical question rather than, like, it's a mystery to me.
Perfect pitch too. So I've wondered that myself, how she's able to deal with
Too.
being a bee.
But with perfect pitch, or don't you just,
Yeah, it took some getting used to. But I think, yeah, I mean, I've gotten used to it now. And I think ultimately the reason why things were like that was because they were adjusting to the natural sonorities of the instruments. And so, or, I mean, and even, now the standard historical pitch is A at 415 hertz, which is a half tone below modern.
not for my band.
But it wasn't the same everywhere, even back in the Baroque period. It was different depending on the city you were in, or even within the same place at the same time, they would have had a different pitch for A for the church versus the opera and so on, because the choir would have sung in a different pitch, and then the wind consort would have played in a different pitch. So yeah, there's a lot of factors.
We ran into that, Kako, when we restored the organ in Houlihan McLean. And we finally figured out how they had managed this small, wonderful, devoted congregation to put in this incredible instrument. And it was because the instrument was built before pitch standardized.
Really? Oh.
1900s. So, of course, the instrument wasn't working. We didn't know. And I remember someone above me on the chain of command getting really mad and saying, this is project creep. But once we got all the pipes out, we found out that it wasn't a pitch, and the entire 3,000 some pipes had to be repitched, every single one.
Oh, wow.
Because otherwise we would have,
you'd only be able to play with historically accurate.
my skin would crawl even singing with it, even singing with it. So, like, do you have anything you could play for us to demonstrate something or show us a Baroque instrument? Or
Yeah, so I actually
A little space here.
Oh no, it's okay. I can grab everything. I have like all of my things set up here. So yeah, so obviously the equipment was different, right? And it's tricky when you're trying to play music of all different periods and trying to experiment with equipment from all different periods, because things evolved. And this is the Baroque violin that I'm currently playing. It's one of the Baroque violins that I'm currently playing. And it's on loan from the Juilliard collection. And it's actually a fairly old violin from, I believe, the 1780s. It's a beautiful instrument. But this compared to, this is the modern violin that I'm currently playing, that is on loan from the Nippon Violin Foundation. So
Nippon Violin Foundation, let's get that commercial in there.
Nippon Violin Company. Yeah.
There we go. Nippon Violin Company is loaning her the more modern violin.
And I'm so lucky to be able to play these beautiful instruments. I mean, really, like, for a violin.
It costs a lot of money if she had to buy.
Yeah, so
Crazy.
yeah, I'm very thankful. But so yeah, these are my this is the Baroque violin.
Question? No.
What?
I'm sorry. I apologize for the Blair Witch moment. We're having technical difficulties here. But why would somebody loan you their violins?
I mean, these are millions of dollars. Like, why?
Not quite. They're
Why they would loan them to her, but why would they loan them to anybody?
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of very generous companies, foundations, private donors as well, and including the Juilliard School, for a musician, especially string instrumentalists, the instrument makes a huge difference, and they are also extremely expensive. And I think a lot of these organizations and people are just eager to see young talents grow and be a part of that. And so, yeah, I mean, us young musicians, we're very lucky to have people like that.
So show us how they're different.
Yes. Okay. So generally, Baroque violins tend to be smaller. So this one's slightly smaller, but yeah, I think one of the big differences, well, you'll notice right away that it's hard to see in this light, but this violin has a chin rest.
Okay.
Which helps me hold the violin more securely. And also the fingerboards on this violin, it's the black part over here.
The ebony.
This violin, it's this wood. But the fingerboard, as you can see, is a lot longer on this, but it goes.
Oh, yeah.
Significantly longer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And this is because in older, up to Baroque and even classical music, the range of the violin, composers weren't writing. Basically, the higher up you go on the fingerboard, the higher the note sounds. And so composers weren't writing much music that goes higher than this, which is already pretty high. But the highest point on the modern violin is a lot higher. And you do get a lot of music as you get later that goes that high. So it's partly because also of the music that was being written for the violin. But actually, when I switch between, and another big difference is actually the strings. So this violin has strings that are made of animal gut, sheep's gut to be exact, and this violin has strings that are made of synthetic core and wound with steel, aluminum, and in some cases silver or gold. And so the sound quality, the tone quality of the instruments changes a lot. The gut string offers a much warmer, more nuanced, rich sound, but is not as direct as synthetic and steel wound strings. So people started using
far tougher to keep in tune, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you guys heard me trying to tune like 20 times before.
No, I mean, I know Maggie used to do 2 and 2. She used to, 2 that were wrapped and, one that was a little bit gut and one that was something else. And it was just never in tune. It was hard to keep it. You'd have to tune all the time.
Yeah, the stereotype is that, historical Baroque musicians tune more than they actually play. But the sound quality is very different. I'll show you very quickly. That's the gut string. I don't know if you can tell through online, but
yes. So, Joseph, could you just get out of the way so she could move over so we can
Oh, yeah.
see
More than happy. Let her do her thing.
I should probably switch over to you soon. But so the the sound quality, I'm not sure if you could really tell, but
Yes.
the steel strings are much more direct and project a lot further and more firmly. And so they became really popular as concert halls became bigger, because it was important to project all the way to the back of, Carnegie Hall, for example. But gut strings offer a really unique warmth of sound. But when I switch between the violins, one of the things that is the most obvious to me right away is actually not the violins themselves, but the bows. Because I'll show you my little collection of bows. So these are the bows that I'm currently working with.
Kind of like me and sax mouthpieces.
Yeah. So this is an early Baroque bow. And if you actually compare the lengths, I'll compare the lengths at the end, but this is the shortest bow that I play on. And even for a bow, its period, it's actually quite long. But as you can see, I'll compare this one with the modern bow. First of all, the length is that much different.
Okay.
And as you can see, the tips, the tort bow was created so that there's even there's a more even distribution of weight between the ends of the bow.
Right.
And this allows for less of a discrepancy between the different direction, the sound when you pull the bow in different directions. So down bow versus up bow. Whereas with the Baroque bow, because of its shape, where it's kind of arched over and then down, there's very little weight at the tip. And so when you play down bow, it's naturally going to be heavier with the weight of the arm. And then the up bow is almost like a reaction. So it adds a natural hierarchy to the way that the notes are organized. So I'm
gonna interrupt you for a minute because I don't know what happened. Some setting went wacky because when I do speaker view, even though you're the speaker, I'm not getting you. Did I hit something wrong? Who knows what I did? Anyway. Yeah, I could. Never mind. Doesn't matter. We'll just all hang on here until I figure out what we're doing.
Anything that was unclear, I can explain again in the question.
No. It was me. I just wanted to see that up closer, and I wasn't able to get you on the whole screen there because I don't know what I'm doing with this.
Okay. Yeah. So I can show all the bows again later, but I do want to give Joseph time to speak. So okay, I will hand over to you now, I guess.
Sure, yeah. So the idea of historical performance, generally people think of it in like a classical music genre perspective, but something that kind of started becoming more clear to me as I started playing with Vince Giordano more is that like the differences between the way people played back in the 1920s and the way people were playing in the 60s and the way people are playing now is so drastically different. To give a little bit of a background on how I ended up playing with him and the ways in which I feel like I've learned so much in this context about playing with historical spirit. I had gone and sat in with David Oswald's band because I knew him from being young. And this is right after I got out of school. And I sat in and Vince Giordano was playing banjo. and I sounded okay, you know. And Vince came up to me and he said, "Hey, do you read music at all? Are you any good at reading music?" And I said, "I'm great at reading music." I was very kind of cocky about it. He goes, "Oh, well, you know, we always need people who can read music and sound good, whatever. You know, I don't know if you know me, Vince Giordano." Oh, I've heard of you before. Yes. Yeah, come and sit in. We play every Monday and Tuesday night at the Iguana. Stop in and sit in, and you know, the guys always need subs, whatever. Um, and just getting out of school and being kind of young and naive, people say stuff all the time like, "Oh, you sound great, man. Oh, so good to see you." And it's just passing talk, whatever. So I didn't go the next week. I was just kind of at home, and all of a sudden, like the next Wednesday, I get a phone call from some random New York number, and I'm like, "Oh, it could be a gig. I better answer the phone." And I answer it, and it's like, "Hey, is this Joseph Boga?" I was like, "Yeah, it's Vince Giordano. You didn't come this week. I was like, "Oh, I was busy. Oh, panicking." He goes, "Well, are you free this Monday or this Tuesday coming up?" And I was like, "Yes, I am." "All right, well, I'll see you there. I'll make sure you're on the list." And so then I kind of had to go. I was like, "Oh man, I guess I got to go." And the minute I got there, I was like transported back into the 1920s to hear the way that these people played the music live. It was like listening to all these amazing recordings I loved growing up, with the recording quality of the 1920s and 30s, but played live in front of you. And there was just this exciting spirit, and it was exactly like the stuff I grew up listening to. And I sat in, I did good enough where I could be greenlit as a sub, and fortunately got to play. So as I was playing with the group, I was learning stuff, delving more back into this music that I loved so much growing up. And, Vince was giving me advice on how to play. You got to play on top of the beat. You have to play with vibrato, things like that. And so I thought I was doing these things while I was playing. And then one night after a gig, he's like, "Joe, you're not quite getting it. You need to like the vibrato. I need the intensity. Maybe check out Louis Armstrong. Maybe." And I was like, oh, it was like a dagger to my heart. I was like, oh, I mean, I grew up listening to Louis Armstrong. I love Louis Armstrong. Obviously, I didn't say any of these things. I listened appropriately and said, "Yes, sir." And I went home, and the thing Vince had said to me, he said, "Man, really listen to Louis Armstrong. At the end of all of his phrases, he puts a little bit of vibrato, That's what sends off the note. That's what gives some excitement to the music." And I was like, "Really? After every note? That seems kind of absurd. I don't know. I used to listen to Louis Armstrong every night before I went to sleep." And I'm thinking in my head on the subway ride home. And then I went home and I listened. I really listened. And I went, at the end of every note, he puts a little bit of vibrato. And then I started doing that, and it got a little better. Now, the only type of vibrato I knew how to do was lip vibrato, which is a little slower and a little wider. So to give you an example, which is generally how like more modern classical musicians would play with that type of vibrato. And so that's the kind I played with. And immediately I came back, I started using vibrato. He's like, it's sounding better. And then, a couple months go by, and then I played a gig where I felt really, really good about it. I was like, man, I nailed it. I was playing the trumpet really well. I was having a great time. And I get home and I have an email from Vince Giordano saying, "Joe, you just aren't quite getting it. You got to get that vibrato. You got to get that heat. You got to get that excitement. Check out this recording of Charlie Teagarden, who is Jack Teagarden, a very famous trombone player, played with Lewis, played with, Paul Whiteman, all sorts of people. Charlie Teagarden, check out this video. He's doing it like great, So I check out the video and I notice he's using hand vibrato, which is something I never really worked on, or the first time I ever saw anybody do it was actually playing next to Mark Gould. He was doing it a little bit when we played a gig once, and he was like shaking the trumpet. I was like, oh man, whenever I tried to do that, it was terrible. So the next day I spent the whole day working on my hand vibrato, and then I sent Vince some recordings. That's it. You got it. And that sounds a little more like this. Right? So for instance, right? It's like faster. It has a little more propulsion to it, right? It's like it's taking you somewhere. And this is something that all those older guys did. And I started watching videos then. I started watching these videos of Louis Armstrong and these people who I admired. And every time they're shaking the trumpet, and I go, wow, that's nuts. I've never seen anybody do this. So
now, is Vince able to articulate all this?
well, I think in some ways he is. He's not a trumpet player.
No, but I mean, that's like great teaching. That's great teaching.
Yeah. And it's amazing the difference it made on the gig. The minute I came in doing that, it was like a different world. Like I sounded so different and so much better playing this early music. And now that I can hear it and my ears are attuned to it, it's like I can't imagine doing it any other way. So, thinking about that, these types of little tiny details can make such a huge difference in the way the music sounds. So, some of the stuff I wanted to talk about that's unique to early jazz. So the vibrato, like I pointed out, it sounds a lot different. The intensity and the forward propulsion of the beat. As jazz kind of went along, things got a little more relaxed. But in early jazz, and even during the swing era, and honestly, I think it kind of carries even into the 60s to a certain degree where musicians play, they play with like a very strict beat, where like the beat is consistent. And you don't put the beat like early or behind, or it's like it's kind of chugging along. The music moves forward all the time, and that's kind of what helps with the swing. And that's something that I always loved about music, whether it was Thelonious Monk and Ornette Coleman or Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington. Like there was a certain energy to the beat and a certain excitement that was there that Vince refers to as playing on top of the beat, not getting behind or dragging with the rhythm. So rhythm is very important, being consistent and being like moving towards something. And vibrato helps you do that. What else? So harmonic language is also something that's characteristic of this earlier music, is the types of forms and the types of tunes. As jazz went on, or actually I should start here. When jazz was starting, it was very experimental. So this music from the 1920s and 30s is wildly different. Each arrangement can have it's very unpredictable. All of a sudden you could have muted trumpets going into this beautiful lush sax line into something that's like more angular, and then a 5-bar introduction into something that's new melodic or harmonic material, It was much more compositional, kind of coming out of a classical kind of perspective on things. And that creativity, because nothing was codified, it's not like there was something that had happened in the past where this is the standard for what it was. It was all experimental music, 20s and 30s music. First time anybody's trying this stuff. And with that comes a lot of excitement. I don't know. It makes sense to me why they used that type of music for cartoons back then. It's very dramatic. It's very it's
intense. It's
right.
Intense.
It's dramatic. There's a lot going on. You get all these different sounds. It's almost like opera music. It's really very composition and illustrative in your mind. And that's something that I really love about the music, that I think as music goes on, it starts to get more codified. And I think this is with classical music as well. Like she was mentioning that back then, like Bach never met somebody who lived 300 miles away because he never moved beyond 200 miles from his house. These types of being separated allowed people to evolve differently and to have their own styles and their own music. And sure, they may have heard one piece from this guy and that influenced their own style, but I think the beginning of jazz is very similar in that way, where you had bands in New York, and then you had bands in California, and you had bands from New Orleans, and you listen to this stuff and it almost sounds like different music. It's so varied and very unique to the individuals.
Joe, you talk about jazz as being experimental then. That's because it's early. How would you classify someone like Miles Davis? Isn't he considered somebody who's experimental?
Totally. No, for sure. I think the golden age of jazz, as people kind of talk of it, from the 20s to the 70s, where there was still a level of popularity that was widespread that it may not enjoy as much now. There was a lot of innovation that was going on. And actually, that's a perfect segment actually into what I was about to talk about. In terms of a historically accurate performance of something. I think ultimately music is trying to convey emotions and feelings, right? And whatever's unique to the person, how they're trying to communicate it. It's considered the international language because you can understand it, you can feel it, even if you don't speak the language, you know. But it is a language, and so if since Kako's Japanese, if I were to say "arigato gozaimasu," she might understand what I'm saying, and it's kind of technically correct for English, but it's not actually correct, right?
She's laughing at you.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. A lot of people wouldn't understand this. So now,
He speaks Japanese.
now if I said "arigato gozaimasu," that's closer to it, and then it's like you kind of get the accent. It means a lot. You know what I mean in terms of the meaning and the communication. So a very famous Miles Davis piece, a very innovative thing that he came up with was modal jazz, kind of codified that in Kind of Blue, which people know that record a lot. And Miles Davis was very notable for not using vibrato. So at the beginning of his solo, right? That would be more like Miles Davis would play it, straight toned, a little relaxed, right? Now, let's imagine I'm a 1920s musician playing the same notes on the page. It sounds nuts, right? Like it sounds wrong. It's like there's a different emotion being communicated there, right?
Now, play something from the 20s the way Miles Davis would play it.
Oh, I know. I might not be as good as doing that because I've been spending so much time working on the earlier stuff.
Yeah.
But no, but I mean that's just I feel like that's such a great illustrative example because studying the earlier music, I think something that a lot of like traditional jazz musicians who study this music a lot get frustrated with when people who are not that come in and play, but they may have checked out some Lewis, they may have done this, but it's like you could say the same words but have a different meaning to them, right? And I mean that's the same with like there was a classic practice technique the actors did at Juilliard where it was like same word, different meaning. Same word, different meaning. And how you can change the meaning of something just by the tone and the inflection, right? And I think music is the same way. And jazz, because it had such an accelerated history where things were evolving and people were changing stuff so quickly, people have I feel like a lot of people have forgotten how you can lose the meaning of something if you don't try and communicate the same message. So I think there are a lot of people who basically will approach playing early jazz like they're playing a Miles Davis song because they're more familiar with Miles Davis and they're more familiar with that stuff. But in doing that and in performing the music and trying to be like, oh, we're going to play the arrangement that King Oliver played the way we play it, but we're still playing the arrangement of King Oliver and we're kind of trying to sound like that, but then not getting these accents and these nuances and whatever, it kind of starts sounding goofy, like as if I were to play Miles Davis Kind of Blue, like Louis Armstrong might play it. And I think it's a cool idea if that's what you're shooting for. But I think a lot of times people without the knowledge will unintentionally get that kind of an effect. And so to people whose ears are attuned to that earlier music and that earlier style and the nuances that are required to convey that message, to hear it without that and with that accent, it sounds kind of funny. You know what I mean? Just like it sounds funny for me to play Miles Davis Kind of Blue with that vibrato and that type of feel,
Yeah. If I
Oh, please.
Yeah, I think the analogy of comparing it to language is like a really useful one because you can still say what you want to say and you can still use your own voice to say what you want to say with the music, but you're speaking the language, as you said, with the accents and the pronunciations and everything in the style that you're speaking in. And it's funny because Joseph always makes fun of me when, I'm speaking English and then I say like croissant or something. I don't do that. I'm not, but something like
She does that. Yeah, she does it.
or
Louis.
yeah.
Right, yeah,
When
yeah.
I say composers' names
Bach.
in the, it would.
Hey, what's the matter with you?
And he's like, "You're speaking English. Why don't you speak English?" And so, but I mean, it is like if you suddenly, if you were to, if you're an English speaker, and then suddenly, you say something in a random Japanese accent or something.
Right. Or if you're speaking Japanese and all of a sudden you go, say like I just went to McDonald's and then say it in Japanese versus then when you say McDonald's, you say McDonald's. You're speaking perfect Japanese and all of a sudden you say McDonald's with like a hard American accent. Like people don't do that, but for some reason we're getting on a tangent here, but
Yes, you are.
this has been an ongoing debate between her. But I do think that that's kind of a good example how like it becomes like a Frankenstein monster of a you're jumping.
So you're not staying in context. Paula,
Right.
And
Paula's leading. Paula's leading toward the-
I guess I want to take this idea of
Right.
and place it in Kako's court, which is that do you ever see someone take a modern piece and apply a Baroque style, and does it work? Or is it something as clear as what Joseph just did with the Miles Davis and the vibrato?
yeah, so I think contemporary music, music written in very recently, in our lifetimes or close to it.
Could you talk just a little bit louder? Speak a little bit louder.
So yeah, I think that contemporary music specifically, so music, written in our lifetimes or close to it, is very eclectic, and they draw influences from a lot of different styles and periods and genres even. And there are some composers who take influence from Baroque sounds or classical sounds and are looking for that kind of style in the music that they write. And so when it's incorporated into their work in that way, I think that it definitely can work, but it's definitely different from playing a modern piece that was written for modern instruments, for modern players, playing that music on a Baroque instrument in the Baroque style. I've never seen that happen, and I do think that would be interesting, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure how convincing I would find it. Yeah.
Well, and to go off that a little bit, like people are usually very surprised when I tell them the most influential trumpet players to me are the most influential jazz musicians to me. It's Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Ornette Coleman. Like if I could only pick three, those would be. And people go, Ornette Coleman, he's so avant-garde, he's so crazy. And but it's not necessarily about like I don't know, like I think intent and like the spirit of something that you're going for really matters a lot in music. And to me, there's a very clear line and connection in terms of the way that music works and the experimental nature and the creativeness that kind of comes from that. And that's not to say that like people can't do their own thing. Like I like so many musicians. Peter Evans is a trumpet player who's an avant-garde musician I love listening to. And I love listening to John Eric Kelso, who plays with Vince Giordano and the Nighthawks. Like those are some of my most favorite trumpet players to listen to who are alive today. And going and hearing them, even though they're such different players, there's something very genuine and something refined and very coherent. It's not like the message they're trying to communicate is clear, you know? It's a good message.
Now, this is out of left field, okay? And then we're going to ask anybody watching on Facebook that has questions, please start putting them in the comments on Facebook. But first, a question for me, because this is a mystery to me. So everybody talks about like historical performance. And then, because you said, Peter Evans, mostly other people do the killing. They recreate Kind of Blue.
Right.
And everybody chases them.
Right.
Heathens. So, like, make sense out of that for me.
Sure. Well, so I find that a very interesting case. I mean, you could get, I'm sure if anybody's watching who's a a sociologist PhD candidate or a psychology PhD candidate, you could definitely do a doctoral thesis on the jazz community as a whole. People get pretty up in arms about stuff, and I mean, I think music is a very intellectual thing and it's very personal, so people think of it very personally. And so for a bunch of people to go and recreate this record that was so iconic and play every rhythm and note and try to do it with the exact same inflection, some people found that to be offensive. Now, me personally, and I think what they intended to do was to kind of explore this concept of whether it's possible to recreate something that was done before the same way. And even if these guys, I mean, they spend months. I mean, this is where I don't understand where people are attacking them or hating on them, because it's like, they're doing their thing, and it was an experiment essentially to see, can we do this? Can we recreate Miles Davis Kind of Blue? And I think that, there's something missing from it. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't sound as good as Miles Davis and his group, because there was something very genuine and personal to them. And though they spent all that time, it wasn't quite the same. And this is where I
have to.
Well, no, I think
for me, the amazing thing was that they spurred the amount of discussion that they did instigate by doing that. What a tribute.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think Miles Davis would have been proud about the amount of controversy that was stirred up. Certainly a controversial man. But I think that it does kind of get down to, well, why do you want to play something historically accurate? And I think that, for me, there are sometimes, if I could be told, it's not like I want to sound exactly like Louis Armstrong, because I know that's not possible, right? But if someone could say, man, when you guys were playing that arrangement of Fletcher Henderson, man, you sounded like you could have been somebody back then. Not necessarily just like Louis Armstrong, but like someone alive during the time who was working and trying to play it. That's a tremendous compliment to me, because it's like, I'm still doing my own thing, yet I'm also channeling a spirit from the past for these people to understand and to feel that spirit that I feel so connected to. A friend of mine, Tristan Clark, who many people may know as one of the Melodica Men, very famous name. But I remember one time we were sitting in he's a really great pianist, and he's a classical trumpet player, but a really great pianist. And we improvised a bit just on some stuff. There were two pianos in a dance room at Juilliard. We were improvising together. And then we were talking about some stuff, and he said, man, I love going home, and man, when I have a hard day, I can go and I can listen to Wagner. And even when I feel like the whole world doesn't understand me, when I go and I listen to that piece of music, I feel like someone understands me, even though it's a communication from the 1800s, someone understands how I feel. Someone gets that. And I think that that's the beauty of music, communicating those things. And as a musician, what I want to do is I want to communicate those feelings, and I want to make people feel the way that I feel when I hear Louis Armstrong or I hear Wagner or I hear these things. And having a deeper understanding of what they intended and what they're trying to say, is important to me as a performer. Even if I choose to do something differently, I understand what they're trying to say, and I will try to communicate the same message with who I am and the voice I have and the way that I speak. if that makes any sense. I don't know. It's a lot, but
Well,
yeah.
and to add on to that, I mean, one of the things that came up in our discussions about this is the kind of the similarity between the composer performer relationships of these different genres. And I think something that's unique about music up until the classical period and maybe into the early romantic period is and especially in the Baroque period and earlier, is that, you know, the performer was seen as the final piece to the puzzle of completing a composition. And so the performer was expected to make ornaments and improvise, play their own cadenzas, and, you know, make the music come to life in their own way. And so, you know, if, for example, we somehow found if somebody had a time machine and went back and recorded Mozart playing one of his own concertos, now if somebody were to recreate that completely, well, I don't know that the people who you know, specialize in and study historical performance would say that is a
the right way
historical performance of the piece, because it's in the spirit of the composition is embedded the expectation that, you know, the performer adds to it and creates their own version of it. So
okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask for questions from viewers.
We could go
And
on like this for hours. So yeah, please.
some questions from viewers, and then I'm going to ask one that I got by messaging, which is, and I know the answer to it, but I will do them the courtesy of asking. They said, "You guys seem so comfortable working and talking together. Are you a couple?" If you weren't, I wouldn't have asked that, obviously.
Yes, we are together. Yes.
Very good. So what, Paula, do you have a question? Do you have any questions? Okay.
Oh no, she's on now, I think. Right?
There you go.
There's this tendency to try to find the original,
Mhm.
and then the struggle with the talent of the performer. You know, and all I can think of, and please don't throw things at me, but I really resent covers sometimes. You know, I'm listening to something and I'm listening to the cover and I'm like, wait, you know, Crosby, Stills and Nash did this much better. Okay, so how do you reconcile this what you're trying to do, which is to find the original, okay, and yet as a performer bring your style to it?
can I do?
Yeah, go ahead. You start. Yeah.
This is something that I've thought a lot about because, you know, growing up playing classical music, unlike jazz, you know, jazz musicians improvise.
It's like an essential component.
Yeah, so it's, you know, whatever you do, it's going to have an original stamp on it. And in the classical music world, you know, there's a lot of things that, you know, especially in, I mean, in all realms of classical music, there are things that are expected of, you know, of in terms of service to the composer and, you know, fidelity to the piece and so on, remaining faithful to what's on the page. And that's where, you know, ornaments, improvisation and things from the Baroque period and around then come into conflict with that idea. But I think in general, you know, I struggled with that idea a lot because, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in today's society, we tend to think of musicians as artists and very deeply original and creative people. And I liked to think of myself that way. But then again, there's this other factor that's, well, you want to serve the music and not yourself, and you want to express the composer's music and not just your own ego. And one thing that kind of clarified a lot of things for me was something that Hilary Hahn, who's a modern violinist, said in a masterclass once, was that what she sees her role as a performer is over advocating for the good that she sees in the music that she plays. And she does a lot of new music and commissions and stuff like that, so there's an added layer when you're playing a piece that's never been heard before. But even pieces that have been heard many times, I mean, everybody, and we've talked about this, with you playing classical music too, like, because this is a conversation that we've had in the past. But, I mean, as musicians, I mean, we grow up hearing and loving music. And I think everybody hears different things that really strike them about a piece of music. And I think of my role as a performer in whatever capacity, as a Baroque, playing Baroque violin or romantic music or whatever it is, as kind of the lens through which the audience sees the music.
Okay.
Or experience.
It's interesting. And Paula, there's a question from an audience member there for you. But first, I have to, it's really interesting to me because one of the things that's so interesting is everybody is trying to do what the composer wanted. And I don't know if Kako knows this, Joseph does. I have commissioned and prepared the premiere of probably 85 choral and instrumental pieces. And in many, many cases, some very established composers, ranging from Nellie Bell to Starrer, when I suggested, I think maybe this goes better at this tempo, or I think maybe this articulation, they were completely, oh my God, that sounds better that way. And I think sometimes when we assume that what is on the piece of paper is, and that's, I really like what you said, Kako, about you bring yourself as a musician to it. Because I think that if you just got stuck with, well, that's on the paper and that's what the composer wanted, if at no point somebody said to the composer, hey, what do you think about it at this tempo? They may never have heard it at that tempo. Some composers, have absolutely everything's on there, but many others sometimes they're delighted. I mean, Václav was always thrilled to hear his own music through somebody else's ears,
Well, I think it's very pertinent to the modern era about even just conversations. I mean, music is a conversation, and the beauty of humanity. I mean, there's this Ornette Coleman interview that's just so beautiful where he talks about how I forget the exact quote, but it's something like sound is to humans what sun is to the light, or light is to the sun, or something like that. And it's sound is what makes us human. It's what allows us to communicate. Somehow we're able to convey all these feelings and all these emotions through sound, even just our words, right? And then we're conveying other things through the notes and the rhythms and all these other things. And cavemen were able to progressed because they were able to tell someone, hey, there's, those berries are poisonous, don't eat them, whatever. However it goes, humanity is kind of defined by its ability to complexly communicate. And I think that that music is the same way. And it kind of comes down to, and people can be overly pretentious about it, or, they can be, but it really does have that kind of an impact. And I think that the genuineness with which one approaches their interpretation of something can really come across. The same way when you're having a conversation with somebody, you can tell when they're really being honest about their feelings and what they feel about it, or whether they're just kind of trying to get something else, or they're regurgitating something else someone said or whatever. Like, you can kind of sense that stuff when you speak to somebody, whether they really know what they're talking about or whether they're not. Some people are better at faking than others, but I think that genuineness that comes through, if you're really genuine about the way you feel about how something goes, I think a composer is going to hear that and go, that's awesome. Many will. I mean, some might not, but, you know, music is a dialogue, and it's practical in terms of, like, his piece isn't going to be played unless you perform it. So if you have an opinion, well, we have to find some compromise on it. Even if he thinks it's a certain way, well, if you're playing principal violin, you might want to do something, but then, you know, your viola player wants to do something else. And you got to find some kind of middle ground and have respect for who's in charge, who's not. And, you know, I mean, I think that there's a certain level of that too to it with music.
Paul has a question for both of you from Bruce Doherty.
Oh, Doherty, hey.
Okay, and it's kind of on the spectrum of what you're talking about. Each heartbeat added to a piece changes it. However, where is the divide between homage and imitation?
I don't know. I mean, I think it is a very what's that very famous Supreme Court case where it's like it had something to do with Hustler magazine, and it was like, I know pornography when I see it.
Well, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it.
I know when I see it, right? And I do think there's a certain element to that. Now, I mean, it's like, it's funny how deep music can get into, like, humanity, but it's like, is there objective truth? Is there, like, you can just start going down this huge rabbit hole that gets kind of nuts. And I'd be glad to do it, but we don't have 10 hours on the thing. I don't know. Kako might have a different answer, but for me,
Might have another answer, yeah.
right. For me, it's kind of like, I think musicians can be overly critical of other musicians, which I think is not necessarily the most helpful, and underly critical in other ways, which isn't the most helpful either. So I don't know. It's complicated. As I said, if there's a PhD student who wants a dissertation, I got one to sell to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with communication. You know, I mean, for me, learning to play in this style, I've learned with anything, but especially, you know, learning to play in a Baroque style and learning to improvise and ornament and things like that. You know, I started with imitating other people and listening to what people did and figuring out what I liked, and you know, trying to come up with my own ideas from becoming acquainted with the language. And when you actually look at a lot of, for example, Bach's work, I mean, a lot of his music was arrangements or transcriptions of music that other composers wrote, like Vivaldi. He arranged, you know, some of Vivaldi's violin concertos for harpsichord and things like that. And I think that's how, you know, as musicians, and I guess, you know, as human beings, like, we learn. And so I think imitation is an important part of learning a craft.
Yeah. I mean, even with language, you know, you imitate your parents. As you get older, you imitate them more. You want to be just like your dad, or you want to be just like your mom. And I think that as you get older, the idea is, with your experiences and your unique perspective
and tastes
and the things you like that you naturally gravitate towards, like, if you're open to it, you can't help but become you. You know what I mean? I don't know if you know what I'm saying. If you're open to it and you're not fighting it. And yeah, I think that there have been plenty of times where I have told myself I was being honest with myself and I wasn't. And then some kind of thing happens in my life, and then I have to look at myself and I go, oh, actually, that's why I was doing that. Or, oh, I was protecting myself because my ego, or this, that, or the other thing. And I mean, it's a struggle to the end of time, but I think musically, music, you end up with those same struggles in music, just like you do in life, you know? So, or any
Question from Anthony Orgy.
hey, oh man, he's watching. We miss you, man. We miss you.
In your opinion, what is the future of live music, given the situation in our world right now?
Right. Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about this, Mom. My opinion, I think it's going to come down to like human beings like to interact. We're social creatures, you know, and at a certain point, people are going to start interacting with each other again and doing stuff. Like nothing in history has told me that that isn't going to be the case. Now,
Making music.
right. No, and I mean that's important to making music because the only way you can make music with someone really is in person because there's always a delay online or you're just playing your part and then it's put into something else. And there's something special that's created when people are in person doing this craft. Just like there's something special when we have this type of conversation in person versus online. Though the beauty of technology allows us to interact this way that would never have been done before. So I appreciate the technology, but there is something missing from it. And
Paula has a question from an audience member for Kako.
oh, sure, yeah.
I'm not sure if this is for Kako or for both of you. This person wants to know what you've learned from each other musically.
Oh man.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've learned tons from Kako, and this is why we wanted to even do this this subject because through me and playing with Vince and exploring these things and listening to things and having these discussions about these, we both feel passionately about music and have a very personal connection, and you know, with all musicians you can be honest with, which there aren't all musicians you can. When you're on a gig, you might not say your 100% opinion on how something sounded because you're being respectful, you're being whatever. But you know, the closer you get with someone, the more honest you can be, and you know, they can really pry into the depth of your musical soul. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I could quantify it in concrete terms, but we talk about this type of stuff all the time. And even just the idea that there is a jazz equivalent to historical performance came from our conversations with each other about the stuff I was learning from Vince and on gigs and from John and telling her, wow, I just came home and Vince said this thing. Oh God, my heart hurts. Oh, you heard me. And then working the next day and being like, wow, this sounds a lot better. Like, what do you think? And, you know, kind of bouncing those ideas off her. That has been profoundly beneficial to me. So
I think that, you know, so much of, yeah, I mean, we have conversations, I mean, about all kinds of things all the time. And I think that, yeah, I mean, so much of, you know, what I believe and my ideas and things have come about as a result of like really getting into like hours long conversations about these kinds of things. So I don't know if I could say one thing in particular. I will say that I think it's definitely been helpful to live with a musician who practices every day. Because I was always terrible about practicing and I always hated it. And like, it's amazing. It's really inspiring. Just like,
even though I sound terrible all the time.
Loved to practice. I used to like come home from work and say, put that down. I listened to this crap all day and all night at work. I don't need to hear it till 1 a.m. You're going to need surgery to get the trumpet out of your brain. Like he loved to practice. He always did.
Yeah, I always hated it. So, and I mean, I've learned to, you know, appreciate it and appreciate the process. And especially, you know, with all of these things happening right now, it's definitely been a source of, you know, security and comfort. But
for me, yeah, definitely.
and I think that, you know, I mean, there was a period at some point after all this started that I like wasn't practicing for a little while. And then one of the things that got me to be like, yeah, I want to practice, you know, I want to start practicing again. I want to practice every day. and just like play the violin was like seeing Joe like pick up the trumpet every day and practice. And now it's kind of a source of conflict because we're fighting over practice time.
Right.
But it's definitely something, that's
Cool.
Yeah, if there's one thing I have is persistence. So that's one thing I've been blessed with.
I think anybody needs to tell me. Wow. So before we wrap up,
Are there any other questions? I mean, I love questions.
well, that was the last question that came in. Paula, do you have any more questions? Paula? You got to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, I did. I'm trying to keep the dog noise down. I actually don't have any more. I would love to go out to dinner with you guys.
Oh,
and
right.
just pick your brains when I have more time to digest, because everything that you've said has revealed a whole different aspect to how I'm going to listen to music.
Oh, wow.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hoping that I could ask you each one more question. What things in your teens would you consider to have been transformative experiences in your musicianship? Like whether it's an event or an experience. It could be, you could pick two each. And then finally, would you each just play us just a little something so that we could hear a little bit more music before we say goodnight? That doable?
Sure. We'll let Kako go first on this one.
in my teens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe the first I always loved chamber music, and I think one of the things that actually really got me interested in pursuing music for a living was my love of chamber music, and I still love chamber music, especially string quartet playing. And I think 1 year, was I a teenager? I was a teenager.
Like you didn't have a traditional high school experience, right, Kako?
No.
No.
Tell us a little bit about that, because it's from a different place. Never mind.
Embarrassing.
That's not a good question that I won't ask that question.
I was not a good student, so there are a lot of gaps in my knowledge that I should have learned from high school.
I thought you went to like an arts high school. I'm sorry.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's different. So it wasn't just an arts high school. It was a professional children's high school, which is different.
Oh.
There are artists and there are chess players and there are models and
Yeah. I mean, not to say that
right.
They don't give a good education, but
Macaulay Culkin went there.
Yeah.
Right.
And Pinchas Zuckerman and Midori and a lot of people. But they were very lenient, and I wasn't very good about not taking advantage. So but yeah, I do think that one experience that definitely stuck with me a lot was just going to a concert, and it was a string quartet concert of the Bartok string quartets, which are still some of my favorite pieces. And I don't know, it was kind of surreal because I was sitting. I mean, I already really liked the pieces, so I kind of sat at the very front, and I got to feel the musicians breathing and everything. And it was just so emotional just listening to the music, and I couldn't stop crying, and that was an experience where I don't know. It just, yeah, it was also as a teenager, you go through a phase where you're like, oh, I don't know what I do want to do. Like, why am I here?
I'm still going through that.
Like what's the point of anything,
Right.
And it just made me feel, I think one of the things that's so beautiful about music is that it makes you really feel emotions so strongly, and feeling those emotions makes you feel alive and human, and that's a beautiful thing. And so I really felt that in that performance, and I thought that if I could make people feel like that, then that was what I wanted to do. So
Jose, you had a very traditional school experience to the point where, I don't know if you remember this, in 7th grade, when the Scranton Times ran an insert about homeschooling, you begged me to homeschool you, and you kept leaving it on the table and telling me how much more practice time you could get in, because you could learn everything you needed to learn about the other stuff in 2 hours a day and then practice. And my answer was, of course, that as soon as I could do 8th grade math, I would be happy to do that.
Yeah.
So what were the things? I mean, obviously you had remarkable
truth to that story.
you had remarkable opportunities, to go on the road with Winton and play with Lauren at amazing places. But I mean, in things that are accessible to any kid that really wants to work. What were the things that really did it for you? Like, kind of were transformative in a way that were within your own age range, doing things with people your own age.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think a very important part of it for me was PMEA, Pennsylvania Music Educators Association. They have like festivals that a lot of states have, where they do like districts, and then they do regionals, they do all state. And then there was an MENC all Eastern, which was like the whole top, northern states and stuff like that. Getting like the competitive element of having to audition and get accepted and then compete against people and get placed was very important to me, because it keeps you honest to a certain degree. Because if you don't get it, you don't get it. You know what I mean? Like, that's the part where, like, sports, it's like either you can run a 3-minute mile or you can't. Whereas music can get very nebulous and, oh, well, it's easy to like say you're serious when you're not really serious. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm trying to do something different, even though you really haven't studied what you're trying to do. And a lot of people won't catch on to it. But in that context of playing in orchestra, I played in, district, regional, all state, all Eastern orchestra. And that competitive element, I think, was very important to be able to measure up against people my own age, and also to be able to get the opportunity to spend a couple days with those people. I just auditioned and worked together on a communal project. Whether I came in first or I came in third, it's like, now that we did the audition, now we have to work together on this project and make the outcome the best we can. And then we're hanging out, we're grabbing food, we're doing this stuff, doing plenty of goofy stuff that kids might do. But that experience, I think, is important, and it's humbling, and it makes you really look at be honest with yourself about what you can do and what you can't. And then I would also say, playing in your band and getting the experience from the stuff from the University of Scranton. I mean, I've been very fortunate in my experiences of generosity and in terms of professional, like touring the world, playing all sorts of places, meeting all sorts of people. And, I've never met anybody who's quite like you or quite does the stuff that, I mean, for me, I'm very fortunate because, I mean, you're my mom, but the program that you've created, and the fact that people can go and hear these amazing musicians for free, and for me, it's like, I didn't want to go, like, oh, I don't want to go to rehearsal tonight. Oh, I don't want to do this. But like, then when I was there, I was happy. And I think that that's a reoccurring, I was nervous to do this podcast and I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. And then I do it. I'm so happy afterwards. And it's like, this was a great experience. I'm very glad to do it. So I would say that's, those things were very important for me. So
cool.
Yeah.
Paula, closing words.
Wow. There's so much here, and there's so much more to learn. I'm a little overwhelmed. It is. First of all, Cheryl, he's absolutely right. That feeling of not wanting to go to rehearsal, and then you drag yourself to rehearsal and you sing, and you go, okay.
Not wanting to go to a rehearsal in my life. I'm the first one there. I'm like, it's a rehearsal. I don't know.
Well, it's the music that brings you joy, and I guess I don't have any questions. I think I see the joy that music has brought to both of your lives and your mothers. Okay, it's a wonder, and I said it at the beginning. I find a bit of the divine in the creation of music. Just in all genres. This has been an honor to sit and listen to you guys. Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks for helping with the co-hosting. Joe's Kako, what do you have to say for the?
I don't know. You just muted yourself before the last thing you said, but I'm assuming what's your final statement? My final statement is, I think music is a deeply personal thing, and it really is like a language in communication, and you want to communicate what you have to say. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you don't have to worry about being too much like someone else because you have something unique to say about it. Even if you sound a lot like someone else, there's something special you have to bring to it if you're being honest about it. And to me, the idea of historical performance, I enjoy hearing that spirit from the 1920s and 30s played in the music because it's different than the spirit of the 1960s or different than the spirit of 1990 or 2020. And but there's a lot in common too, and it can make you look at things in different ways to hear it from a different perspective. And I think that to study those things and try and communicate that spirit to people in a modern time accurately, I think can be very illuminating and valuable. So that's why I think people should consider and look into things a little bit. You want to know the original meaning, whether you're reading Shakespeare. There's a great video that has millions of views of the people at what's the name of the Globe Theater, right? The people who are experts in reading Shakespeare, pronouncing it in the original English, right? In the original English, and it sounds incomprehensible. But when you hear it spoken, even if you don't understand what they're saying, there's something there that you can feel. And I think that music is the same way, in all art forms. It's like the composers or the artists are trying to say something. And if you're trying to be an artist and you're trying to say something, it helps to know what the other people are trying to say so you can formulate your thoughts accurately and truthfully, So that's my final statement.
Closing statement.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that another thing that we've talked about with music is that it has the ability to transport the person who's experiencing it to a different world. And I think that while you're just sitting down and listening, and I think that definitely, when I hear Monteverdi performed with this historical approach, it really, I've never been in, 17th century Italy, but I feel like I'm in that world. And that's what it just makes music so much, it brings it to life and it makes it so much fun. And and I think it's the same principle with early jazz. So yeah, long live music.
Well, we've got all kinds of things coming up. We hope that everybody will join us and watch for the next one. Over the course of the next couple of months, we're going to have Kenny Rampton, who is the lead trumpet player with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, and he's going to talk about music as a healing art, along with one of our alumni physicians, and the great Lauren Schoenberg. And Lauren Schoenberg, I wouldn't even ever ask him what he's going to talk about, because whatever he comes and talks about is riveting every time. The first time that I ever heard anybody talk about music history that I wasn't like, yeah, whatever, I'm going to go play my clarinet. Lauren had me transfixed. And when he was done, I didn't want it to be over. That's the very first time I heard him. And it
yes, the details down too. Yeah.
He has it all, but he makes it come alive. And David Ball, organist from out at the Crystal Cathedral in LA, and one of his students are going to join us, and they're going to show us a little bit of, they're rebuilding in Oregon. They're going to talk about what's ahead for both of them. And we have got also Sean Jones is going to try to get here so we can have a conversation about music education. Sean Jones is just an amazing trumpeter, an amazing teacher. He's at the Peabody Conservatory, runs the jazz department. He also is the conductor of the Carnegie National Youth Jazz Orchestra, previously taught at Berkeley.
Played in the Lincoln Center Orchestra. Yeah.
Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra as lead trumpet for a number of years, and truly a great educator, and the newly elected president of the Jazz Education Network. And we're going to talk some about music education and its importance, and what it does even for the kids that don't go to major in music. I'm really excited because we're going to get two of the easiest people for me to talk to about uncomfortable topics. Jeff Carnell from the Philadelphia Orchestra and Wycliffe Gordon. And we're going to have
me. It's not me.
You, absolutely. And we're going to have them here together, and we're going to talk about a lot of current things that either have parallels within musicianship and ensembles, like democracy and leadership and citizenship. And we're also going to talk about things like, does music stand on its own, or does, do the sins of the composer get visited on the product of the work? So all kinds of great things coming up, but not as great as it would be to have my students back making music. So students of ours from the performance music that are watching, singers, I just want you to know, take heart, because if we can't sing together in the fall, I started the process of buying some steel drums today. So we're still going to be making and thank you, everybody. Kako, Joseph, always a delight. And it's good to actually see you. I haven't actually seen them since the holidays. And Paula, thank you so much for joining us. And for keeping the dogs off the video screen. I think that was impressive. Thank you, audience. And we'll see you back for our next one, number 12. Check it out. Keep your eyes open to find out who it'll be. What, Joseph?
Thank you, Mom. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.